Hello dear travellers. Welcome back to our peaceful sanctuary, where the boundaries between the everyday world and the realm of ancient magic grow thin and translucent. Tonight, we venture into the misty heart of Irish folklore to explore one of the most haunting, most evocative, and most deeply misunderstood figures to ever grace the Emerald Hills of Ireland. Picture yourself standing alone on a windswept Irish hillside as twilight deepens into true darkness. The air grows cold, and a thin mist rises from the ancient earth beneath your feet. In the distance, carried on the wind, you hear it. A sound unlike any other. Not quite a scream, not quite a song. A keening, mournful wail that seems to echo from the very stones themselves, from the burial mounds of ancestors long forgotten, from a time when the veil between our world and the other world was gossamer thin. This is the cry of the Banshee. And tonight, we will walk together through her story. Find yourself a comfortable place to settle. Let the tensions of the day drift away like morning fog burning off the fields. Allow your breathing to slow and deepen. We have much ground to cover in our journey through the shadows and moonlight of Irish mythology, through centuries of folklore and whispered tales, through the very fabric of Irish cultural identity. The Banshee awaits us, patient as the stones, eternal as the wind that howls across the bogs and through the ancient forests. Let us begin at the beginning, with her name itself. The word Banshee, that we use in English, is merely an echo, an approximation of something far older and more resonant. In the Irish language, she is known as being sídhe, and the pronunciation of these words carries within it the weight of centuries. Bean, spoken as ban, is simply the Irish word for woman. But sídhe, pronounced she, contains worlds within it. The sídhe were the fairy mounds that dot the Irish countryside like sleeping giants. These earthen tumuli, some dating back to the Neolithic age, thousands of years before the first written records, were considered gateways to the other world. They were the dwelling places of the Tuatha Dé Danann, the mythical race of godlike beings who once ruled Ireland before retreating beneath the earth when the Milesians, the ancestors of the modern Irish, arrived on those ancient shores. So sídhe translates most directly as woman of the fairy mound or woman of the fairies. She is not of our world, not entirely. She exists in that liminal space between the realm of the living and the realm of the dead, between the world we see and the world we sense in the darkness just beyond our peripheral vision. The word sídhe itself evolved over time. In Old Irish, it referred specifically to the mounds, the physical places. But as centuries passed and language shifted like sand beneath the tide, sídhe came to refer not just to the dwelling places but to the beings who lived within them. The fairies themselves became known as the sídhe, and so the Banshee became understood as a fairy woman, a supernatural being with one foot in each world. Throughout history, scholars and storytellers have offered various translations and interpretations of what the Banshee truly represents. Victorian-era folklorist D.R. McAnally Jr., writing in his 1888 work Irish Wonders, noted that the name had been translated by different scholars as the female fairy, the woman of peace, the lady of death, the angel of death, the white lady of sorrow, the nymph of the air, and the spirit of the air. Some of these translations speak to the influence of Christianity on Irish folklore. The angel of death interpretation, for instance, reflects the Church's centuries-long effort to recontextualize the old fairy beliefs within a Christian framework. The Church sought to explain away the ancient beings of Irish mythology, sometimes portraying them as fallen angels or demons, attempting to fit the wild, untamed spirits of pre-Christian Ireland into neat theological categories. But the Banshee resisted easy categorization. She remained what she had always been, a bridge between worlds, a voice that spoke of death and mourning, of loss and remembrance, of the eternal cycle that connects us all to those who came before and those who will come after. The linguistic journey of the Banshee's name also reveals regional variations across the Celtic lands. In Scottish Gaelic, She is known as the Banshee, with sídhe being the Scottish pronunciation of the Irish side. In Scotland, particularly in the Highlands, she often appears as the Bean Nye, the washerwoman, seen at lonely fords and streams, washing the blood-stained clothes of those about to die. Even Wales has its own version, called the Grach y Ribyn, though this figure is often described as more witch-like, less connected to noble families than her Irish counterpart. The Banshee's name also appears in Old Irish texts with slight variations. In medieval manuscripts, you might find her referred to as Benshide, reflecting the older spelling conventions. These ancient texts, painstakingly copied by monks in cold scriptoria, preserved not just the name but fragments of the beliefs that surrounded her, though often filtered through a Christian lens that sought to make sense of these powerful supernatural beings. What strikes us when we examine these linguistic roots is how deeply embedded the Banshee is in the very structure of Irish language and thought. She is not a later addition to Irish folklore, not a medieval invention or a Christian morality tale. Her origins stretch back into the mists of pre-Christian Ireland, to a time when the land itself was understood to be alive with spirits, when every hill and stream had its guardian, when the dead were never truly gone but remained close, watching over their descendants. The pronunciation of Benshide itself carries a kind of music, a melody that hints at the keening cry for which she is famous. The soft sh sound of side whispers like wind through grass, like breath leaving a body, like the rustle of a spirit passing from one world to the next. To speak her name properly is to invoke something of her essence, to acknowledge the thin places in the world where mortality and immortality meet and mingle. Understanding her name helps us understand her nature. She is fundamentally liminal, existing at thresholds and boundaries. She appears at the boundary between life and death, at the moment when a soul prepares to cross from one state to another. She inhabits the fairy mounds, which are themselves boundaries between the upper world and the underworld. She is heard in the boundary times, at dusk, at midnight, at dawn, when one day dies and another is born. This linguistic foundation, this understanding of what Benshide truly means, will serve us well as we delve deeper into her mythology. For the Banshee is not simply a ghost story or a Halloween fright. She is a profound expression of how the Irish understood death, mourning, family, and the intricate connections that bind the living to the dead across the generations. To truly understand the Banshee, we must travel back through the layers of Irish history and mythology to a time before Christianity shaped the Irish worldview, to an era when Ireland was ruled by beings of immense power and otherworldly beauty, the Tuatha Dé Danann. The Tuatha Dé Danann, whose name translates as the tribe of the goddess Danu, were the fourth wave of settlers to come to Ireland, according to the medieval text Lebor Gabála Aren, the Book of the Taking of Ireland. But they were no ordinary settlers. They were described as gods and goddesses, possessing magical powers far beyond those of mortals. They brought with them 4 treasures of immense power: the Stone of Destiny, which would cry out when the rightful king of Ireland stood upon it; the Spear of Luff, which guaranteed victory in battle; the Sword of Nuada, from which no enemy could escape; and the Cauldron of the Dagda, which could feed an army and yet never empty. These were beings of light and shadow, of tremendous beauty and terrible power. They were skilled in magic and druidry, in poetry and warfare, in healing and prophecy. For generations, they ruled Ireland, making it a land of wonders. But nothing in this world lasts forever, and eventually, the Milesians arrived, mortal humans, the ancestors of the Gaels who inhabit Ireland today. A great battle was fought, and though the Tuatha Dé Danann possessed magic, they could not ultimately prevent the Milesians from claiming the surface of Ireland. So a bargain was struck. The Tuatha Dé Danann would retreat beneath the earth, into the side, the fairy mounds scattered across the Irish landscape. They would become the fairy folk, the Aos Sai, dwelling in a parallel world that existed alongside the mortal realm but remained separate from it, accessible only through certain doors, at certain times, to certain people. This transformation from gods to fairies is crucial to understanding the Banshee, for she is understood to be one of the Aos Sai, one of the fairy folk who are the diminished descendants of those mighty Tuatha Dé Danann. The historian Peter Beresford Ellis, in his Dictionary of Irish Mythology, confirms this connection, explaining that after the gods went underground and were transformed in popular folk memory into fairies, a banshee became a female fairy attached to a particular family, warning of approaching death through her eerie wail. But the connection goes deeper still, reaching back to specific goddesses of the Tuatha Dé Danann, particularly to the figure known as the Morrigan, sometimes called the Morrigan, the Great Queen or Phantom Queen. The Morrigan was a goddess of battle, of fate, of sovereignty, and of death. She was a shapeshifter who could take many forms, though she most often appeared as a crow or raven, those dark birds that feast on carrion, that circle battlefields waiting for the dead. The Morrigan had the power to predict death, to influence the outcome of battles, to wash the clothes and armor of those who would soon fall in combat. In the epic tale Táin Bó Cúailnge, she appears to the hero Cúl Chulainn in various forms, offering prophecies of his doom. The Morrigan is sometimes described as a triple goddess, appearing in 3 forms or as 3 distinct yet interconnected figures: Morrigan, Bive, and Mocha, though some traditions name different sisters in this grouping. These forms have been interpreted by some scholars as corresponding to the 3 ages of womanhood: the maiden, the mother, and the crone, though this interpretation itself may reflect modern influences on how we understand ancient beliefs. What seems clear from the texts is an association between multiple female figures connected to war, death, and prophecy. Now, consider the descriptions of the Banshee, and the parallels become apparent. The Banshee, too, appears in 3 primary forms: as a beautiful young woman, as a mature matron, and as a withered old crone. Like the Morrigan, she is associated with death and prophecy. Like the Morrigan, she is connected to washing, particularly in the Scottish and some Irish traditions where she appears as the Bean Nigh, the washerwoman scrubbing blood from clothes at lonely fords. Like the Morrigan, her cry can be heard before death, a shriek that echoes the cries of crows and ravens. Some scholars have suggested that the Banshee represents a folk memory of the Morrigan, a way that the ancient goddess survived in popular belief even after Christianity had officially replaced the old gods. Patricia Lysate, a noted expert on Banshee folklore, has written about this connection, noting that in certain areas of Ireland, the supernatural being known as the Banshee is also called the Bad, which is another name for one of the figures associated with the Morrigan. The evolution from goddess to fairy to ghost represents the layering of belief systems in Ireland. When Christianity arrived, it did not completely erase the old beliefs. Instead, those beliefs adapted, transformed, and continued in new forms. The gods became fairies. The fairies became ghosts. But beneath these transformations, something of the original power remained, something that spoke to truths about death and mourning that transcended any particular religious framework. The fairy mounds themselves, the physical side, reinforce this connection to ancient powers. Archaeological excavations have revealed that many of these mounds are indeed ancient burial sites, some containing passage tombs dating to 3,000 years before the Common Era. These were places where the ancestors were laid to rest, places of power and reverence. That the Tuatha Dé Danann were said to dwell within them suggests a deep connection in Irish thought between the dead, the divine, and the fairy folk, concepts that may have once been more closely intertwined than later traditions would suggest. When a banshee appears, then, she is not simply a random spirit. She is a manifestation of this deep ancestral presence. She represents the connection between a family and its past, between the living and the dead, between mortal concerns and immortal truths. She is a remnant of goddess worship, of the time when female deities held dominion over death and fate, when the feminine divine encompassed both the nurturing mother and the terrifying destroyer. This ancient lineage explains much about the Banshee's nature. It explains why she is powerful yet not necessarily malevolent. It explains why she is tied to specific families, for the gods of old were often connected to particular tribes and clans. It explains why her appearance and cry inspire such awe and dread, for she carries within her an echo of divine power, diminished perhaps but never fully extinguished. The Christianity that came to Ireland in the 5th century and thereafter sought to suppress or reinterpret these pagan elements. The Church told the people that the fairies were fallen angels, or demons, or illusions sent by the devil. But the Banshee persisted in popular belief because she served a function that went beyond any particular religious framework. She provided a way to understand and cope with death. She maintained the connection between the living and the dead. She ensured that those who passed from this world were properly mourned and remembered. In the hidden corners of Ireland, in the rural areas far from the reach of church authority, the old beliefs mingled with the new. People would cross themselves and say their prayers, but they would also leave offerings for the fairies, avoid cutting down fairy trees, and listen with dread for the cry of the Banshee in the night. This synthesis of Christian and pre-Christian belief became characteristic of Irish spirituality, and the Banshee stands as one of its most enduring symbols. As we move forward in our exploration, keep in mind these ancient roots. The Banshee is not merely a superstition or a folktale. She is a living connection to Ireland's pre-Christian past, a thread that connects modern Ireland to the world of the Tuatha Dé Danann, to a time when gods walked the earth and the boundary between the mortal and immortal worlds was crossed with regularity. She reminds us that some truths are too deep to be erased by the passage of time or the arrival of new religions. To understand the Banshee fully, we must understand the practice of keening, for it is in this ancient Irish funeral tradition that we find the clearest connection between supernatural belief and human ritual, between the world of spirits and the world of the living. Keening, from the Irish word caoned, meaning to cry or to weep, was an ancient and sacred practice. It was a form of ritual lamentation, a vocal expression of grief so powerful, so primal, that it seemed to tear open the boundary between life and death itself. The keening woman, the Banshee, was a figure of immense importance in Irish society, though her role was complex and often misunderstood. The practice of keening can be traced back at least to the 8th century based on written references, though its roots likely extend much further into Ireland's pre-Christian past. References to keening appear in medieval Irish texts, and the practice continued, despite church opposition, well into the 19th century and beyond in some rural areas. When someone died in ancient and medieval Ireland, their body would be washed and prepared for burial, then laid out in the home for the wake. The wake was not merely a gathering, it was a sacred time, a threshold period when the soul was understood to be transitioning from this world to the next. During this time, the community would gather to pay respects, to pray, to tell stories about the deceased, and most importantly, to keen. The keening itself was a remarkable art form. It combined elements of song, poetry, and raw emotional expression. A skilled keener would improvise verses praising the deceased, recounting their virtues, lamenting their loss, and expressing the grief of the family. The keen was structured around repeated melodic phrases that could be extended or shortened depending on the emotion of the moment. It involved not just vocal expression but physical movements as well, rocking, swaying, sometimes tearing at one's clothes or hair in displays of profound grief. In the earliest times, it was the role of bards, the poets and storytellers who held honored positions in Irish society, to compose and perform the funeral lamentations for chiefs and nobles. These were elaborate compositions, carefully crafted to honor the dead and console the living. But over time, This role became increasingly associated with women, particularly older women who had experienced loss themselves and could channel authentic grief into their keening. Some keening women were members of the deceased's family, expressing their genuine sorrow through this traditional form. But there also arose a class of professional keeners, women who were hired to lead the lamentation at funerals. The best keeners were highly sought after and could command significant payment for their services. They traveled from wake to wake, lending their voices and their skill to ensure that the dead were properly mourned. These professional keeners would often be paid in alcohol, whiskey or poitin, the traditional Irish spirit. This practice became controversial, particularly as the Catholic Church grew in power and influence. The Church viewed the keening tradition with suspicion. It seemed too pagan, too primal, too much like the old ways that Christianity had supposedly replaced. The payment of alcohol to keeners was seen as particularly problematic, as it suggested that these women were profiting from death and engaging in behavior unbecoming of good Christians. Church authorities attempted repeatedly to suppress the practice of keening. Bishops issued edicts against it. Priests preached sermons condemning it as pagan superstition. But keening persisted, because it fulfilled a deep human need, the need to give voice to grief, to communally acknowledge loss, to create a space where sorrow could be expressed fully and without shame. The keeners themselves occupied a strange social position. They were necessary, even revered for their ability to properly honor the dead. Yet they were also somewhat feared and marginalized. The ideal keener was described in folklore as a woman who lived at the margins of society, who traveled through forests rather than using roads, who was dirty and disheveled, who existed in an in-between state much like the Banshee herself. This liminality allowed her to move between the world of the living and the world of the dead, to speak on behalf of both. The sound of the keen itself was unforgettable. Those who heard it and left written descriptions speak of its power to move listeners to tears, to evoke not just sorrow but a profound sense of the mysteries of life and death. Sir Walter Scott, the Scottish writer, compared it to the ululatus of ancient Rome, another form of ritual wailing. The keen began in the chest or throat on a low note, then rose gradually to the highest treble, creating a sound that was described as haunting, unearthly, filled with both beauty and anguish. And here we come to the crucial connection. According to Irish mythology, keening laments are sung by banshees. A banshee would sing when a family member died or was about to die, even if the person had died far away and news of their death had not yet reached the family. Her wailing would be the first warning that death had occurred. In this sense, the supernatural banshee and the human keener fulfill the same function. They are both voices of lamentation, both heralds of death, both bridges between the living and the dead. Some folklorists have theorized that the banshee legend arose directly from the practice of keening. Perhaps the sound of a keener wailing in the night, heard from a distance, became attributed to a supernatural source. Perhaps the marginal, liminal position of professional keeners, these women who dwelt at the boundaries of society, who worked with death, who were paid in alcohol and sometimes considered sinful, led to legends that they themselves became banshees after death, condemned to continue their keening for eternity. There is a darkness to this theory. Some versions of the legend suggest that keeners, because they accepted alcohol as payment and because the church considered them sinners, were cursed to become banshees after death, forever mourning, forever warning of death, unable to find peace. This interpretation represents the church's attempt to use fear to suppress a practice it could not eliminate through direct prohibition. But there is also something profound in this connection, whether it represents historical causation or simply parallel developments. Both the banshee and the practice of keening represent a fundamental human truth, that death must be acknowledged, that grief must be expressed, that the passing of a soul from this world requires not silence but sound, not suppression of emotion but its full, terrifying expression. The keening tradition persisted longer in rural Ireland, particularly in the west, in areas like Connemara, the Aran Islands, and County Donegal. In these places, far from urban centres and the full influence of church authority, the old ways held on. Even into the 20th century, recordings were made of authentic keening songs. One of the most famous was recorded in the early 1950s when sídhe Ni Gaultcho, known as Kitty Gallagher, of Gath Dobhay in County Donegal, sang a keening song she had learned from an old woman to the American folklorist Alan Lomax. Her recording preserves for us something of what keening actually sounded like, a melody both beautiful and heartbreaking, words expressing sorrow in a way that transcends language. By the middle of the 20th century, keening had become effectively extinct as a living practice. Funerals became more formalized, more firmly under church control. The expression of grief became more subdued, more private. But the memory of keening remained, and with it, the memory of the Banshee, those two things forever intertwined in the Irish imagination. What keening teaches us about the Banshee is this: she is not simply a monster or a ghost meant to frighten children. She is a manifestation of the understanding that death requires acknowledgement, that grief requires expression, that the boundary between life and death is marked not by silence but by sound. The Banshee's wail is the eternal keen, the voice that ensures no death goes unnoticed, no loss goes unmarked, no soul passes from this world without being properly mourned. In our modern world, where death is often hidden away in hospitals and funeral homes, where grief is expected to be private and brief, where we are encouraged to move on quickly from loss, the Banshee and the keening tradition remind us of an older wisdom. They remind us that death is not the enemy of life but its inevitable companion, that mourning is not weakness but necessary work, that the dead deserve to be remembered and the living deserve the chance to express their sorrow fully and without shame. One of the most fascinating and perplexing aspects of Banshee lore is the variety of forms in which she appears. Unlike many supernatural beings who have a consistent appearance across different tales, the Banshee seems to shift and change, appearing differently to different people, in different places, at different times. Yet within this variety, patterns emerge, and these patterns reveal deep truths about the nature of death, mourning, and the feminine divine in Irish culture. The three primary forms of the Banshee correspond to the three ages of womanhood, a pattern that appears throughout Celtic mythology and beyond. This tripartite division, maiden, mother, and crone, represents not just stages of biological development, but archetypal expressions of feminine power and wisdom. First, the maiden. In this form, the Banshee appears as a young woman of exceptional beauty. Her hair is long and flowing, often described as red, silver, or golden, catching the moonlight as it streams behind her. Her face is pale, sometimes described as luminous, with an otherworldly quality that marks her as not quite human. She is dressed in white, or sometimes in silver, colors that speak of purity but also of death, for white was often the color of burial shrouds. This maiden Banshee appears in stories where she is said to be the spirit of a young woman who died before her time, particularly one who died tragically, murdered, or dead in childbirth, or lost to some violent end that cut short her life before she could fulfill her natural span. Some tales suggest she was gifted with music and song in life, and that this gift followed her into death, transforming her voice into the supernatural keen that now heralds death for others. There is something particularly poignant about the maiden Banshee. She represents potential unrealized, life cut short, beauty transformed by tragedy. When she appears, she often sings rather than shrieks, her voice hauntingly beautiful, filled with sorrow but also with a strange sweetness. She is said sometimes to comb her long hair with a silver comb, an image that recurs in Banshee lore. The act of combing one's hair is intimate, vain, human. Yet when performed by a spirit of death, it becomes uncanny, a reminder of the beauty that persists even in mortality. The second form is that of the matron, the mother. This banshee appears as a woman in the prime of life, full-figured and stately. She might be dressed in green or in grey, earthy colours that connect her to the land itself, to Ireland as mother. This form emphasises the banshee's role as a guardian of families, as one who watches over her descendants with the fierce protective love of a mother. When she wails, it is with the profound grief of a mother who has lost a child, a grief that encompasses not just sorrow but a sense of having failed in the most fundamental duty, to protect those under her care. This matron banshee represents the power of women in their role as guardians of family and tradition. In Irish society, women held significant roles in maintaining family connections, in passing down stories and customs, in ensuring that the dead were properly honoured. The matron banshee embodies this role at a supernatural level, becoming the eternal guardian of her family's lineage, mourning each loss while simultaneously ensuring that the family continues. The third form, and perhaps the most frequently described in folklore, is that of the crone. This banshee appears as an old woman, sometimes described as frightening in her aged appearance. Her hair is grey or white, long and tangled, sometimes described as like seaweed or lichen, wild and unkempt. Her face is wrinkled and weathered by time. Her eyes are red from centuries of weeping. In some descriptions, her appearance becomes grotesque. She might have a single tooth, or one nostril, or long fingernails that look like claws. She wears a grey cloak or torn rags, and her body might be hunched with age. This crone banshee embodies the wisdom that comes with age and the terrible knowledge of mortality. She has seen countless deaths, mourned countless losses. She is the grandmother, the wise woman, the keeper of family memory who stretches back through generations. Her frightening appearance reflects the fear with which Irish society sometimes viewed old women, particularly those who lived at the margins of society, those who possessed knowledge and power that younger people did not understand. But her appearance also reflects an important truth, that death itself is frightening, that there is no escaping the fact of mortality, and that sometimes wisdom comes with a terrible cost. In some accounts, particularly in parts of Ulster and Scotland, the banshee appears as the Bean Nye, the washerwoman. This figure is seen at lonely fords and streams, washing the blood-stained clothes or armour of those who are about to die in battle. This image has clear connections to the Morrigan, who was said to do the same before battles. The washerwoman banshee is often described as having bird-like feet, sometimes webbed like those of a water bird, red in colour. If a mortal can sneak up on her and suckle from one of her long breasts, she will grant them a wish, though this is obviously a dangerous proposition. The washerwoman aspect emphasizes the connection between the banshee and water, and through water to birth and death. Water cleanses, purifies, marks transitions. The image of washing blood-stained clothes suggests an attempt to cleanse death itself, to prepare the dead for their journey to the next world. It also suggests intimate knowledge of who will die, for only someone with supernatural knowledge would know whose clothes to wash. The variety in the banshee's appearance reflects several realities. First, it shows how folklore evolves and changes as it passes from person to person, region to region, generation to generation. Each family, each community, shape the banshee legend to fit their own experiences and understanding. Second, it reflects the reality that death comes in many forms, at many ages. The maiden represents those who die young. The matron represents those who die in the prime of life. The crone represents those who live to old age but eventually succumb to time. All are mourned. All deserve a herald. There is also a shape-shifting quality to many descriptions of the banshee, suggesting that a single banshee might appear differently at different times. This shape-shifting ability connects her again to the Morrigan and to the general understanding of fairy beings as capable of changing their form at will. It suggests that her appearance might depend on the nature of the death she heralds, on the person who sees her, or on her own choice in the matter. Regional variations in her appearance add another layer of complexity. In Munster, the southern province of Ireland, the Banshee is often described as stately and dignified, dressed in white or grey, her cry soft and mournful. In Connaught in the west, her appearance is more terrifying, with blood-red eyes and wild hair, her grief more intense and frightening. In Ulster to the north, the washerwoman aspect is more common. In Leinster to the east, she is more closely tied to specific noble families and might appear more refined, more aristocratic. These regional variations reflect the diversity of Irish culture itself, the way that different parts of Ireland developed different traditions while maintaining a common core of belief. They also reflect the landscape. The wild, rugged western coast might naturally give rise to more fearsome visions, while the more settled eastern regions might emphasize the Banshee's role as guardian of established families. One physical feature appears consistently across almost all descriptions. Her eyes are red from continual weeping. This detail is crucial. It emphasizes that the Banshee's primary emotion is not malice or anger but sorrow. She weeps for the dead, for the living who will grieve them, for the endless cycle of life and death. Her red eyes mark her as one who has seen too much loss, who bears the weight of generations of mourning. They remind us that her appearance, however frightening, is rooted in profound sadness. Another consistent feature is her association with specific colors. White, grey, silver, and sometimes green appear again and again in descriptions. White and silver are colors of moonlight, of spirits, of purity but also of death. Green is the color of Ireland itself, of the land, but also of the fairy folk. Grey is the color of mist, of twilight, of the liminal spaces where the mortal and immortal worlds meet. These colors distinguish her from the ordinary world, marking her as other, as supernatural. The Banshee is sometimes described as small in stature, anywhere from 1 to 4 feet tall, emphasizing her nature as a fairy being. Other accounts describe her as tall, even unnaturally tall, looming over the landscape. This variation in size might reflect the ancient belief that fairies could make themselves appear larger or smaller at will, or it might simply reflect the subjectivity of human observation, the way fear and awe can distort perception. What all these physical descriptions teach us is that the Banshee defies simple categorization. She cannot be reduced to a single image or form. She is as varied and complex as death itself, as varied as the many ways grief manifests, as varied as the women of Ireland whose lives, deaths, and mourning gave birth to her legend. To try to pin down exactly what the Banshee looks like is to miss the point. She looks like what each person, each family, each generation needs her to look like to understand and cope with the reality of mortality. If the Banshee's appearance varies from tale to tale, one thing remains constant and unmistakable: her voice. It is her cry, her wail, her keening that defines her, that announces her presence, that fulfills her purpose as herald of death. To understand the Banshee, we must understand her voice, for it is in that voice that her true nature reveals itself. The Irish word for the Banshee's cry is caoined, the same word used for the human practice of keening. This linguistic connection reinforces the deep relationship between the supernatural being and the human ritual, between the voice that comes from the otherworld and the voice that comes from the depths of human grief. But what does the Banshee's wail actually sound like? Descriptions vary, yet certain qualities appear again and again in the accounts of those who claim to have heard it. Some describe it as a high-pitched, piercing scream, a sound that seems to cut through the air like a blade, that makes the blood run cold and sends shivers racing down the spine. This scream is associated with sudden, violent death, with tragedy and terror. It is a sound that speaks of anguish beyond bearing, of a soul torn from life against its will. Those who hear this form of the wail often speak of being frozen in fear, unable to move or think, overwhelmed by dread. Others describe a low, mournful keening, a sound more like singing than screaming. This version of the wail is melodious yet heartbreakingly sad, rising and falling in waves of sorrow. It carries undertones of lament and loss, of grief that has deepened into something almost beautiful in its profundity. This cry is associated with deaths that are gentler, expected, natural. The passing of an elderly person, the death that comes at the end of a long illness. It speaks not of terror but of sorrow, not of violence but of release. In County Kerry, in the southwest of Ireland, the Banshee's cry was said to most closely resemble the authentic human keening, that particular melodic structure that combined words and non-word sounds into an expression of mourning. This suggests that in Kerry, at least, the connection between supernatural and human keening remained strong in folk memory. In the north, in Ulster, some accounts describe the Banshee's cry as sounding like the clapping of two boards together, or like the sound of a bird's wings beating against a window. These descriptions emphasize the percussive, rhythmic quality of the sound, something that might be heard at a distance and mistaken for a natural noise before its supernatural origin becomes clear. In parts of Leinster in the east, the cry is described as so piercing it can shatter glass. This detail emphasizes the supernatural power of the sound, its ability to affect the physical world. It also suggests the violence with which grief can break through the barriers we construct, the way intense emotion can shatter the fragile structures that usually contain it. The Banshee's cry is also said to resemble the cry of certain animals, particularly birds. The connection to crows and ravens appears frequently, linking the Banshee again to the Morrigan and to the general association between corvids and death. But the cry is also compared to the wail of owls, those night-hunting birds whose calls echo through darkness. The association with bird cries might help explain how some Banshee sightings arose. A night bird's call, heard in conditions of stress or expectation of death, might be interpreted as something supernatural. The timing of the Banshee's wail is significant. She cries at night, in the hours of darkness when the boundary between worlds is thinnest. Particularly, she is heard at midnight, the hour when one day dies and another is born, a liminal moment that belongs neither to yesterday nor tomorrow. She might also be heard at dusk or dawn, those other threshold times when day and night meet and mingle. The cry might come from a distance, echoing across hills and valleys, or it might seem to come from just outside a window, intimate and immediate. Some accounts describe the sound as seeming to come from everywhere and nowhere at once, as if the air itself were lamenting. This spatial ambiguity reinforces the Banshee's otherworldly nature. She is not bound by normal physical constraints, not limited to a single location. An important aspect of the Banshee's wail is who hears it. In most traditions, the person who is about to die does not hear the Banshee's cry. Instead, it is heard by family members, by those who will be left behind to grieve. This makes sense when we consider the Banshee's function. She is not coming for the dying person but warning the living, preparing them for the loss they are about to experience, giving them time to say goodbye, to make peace, to prepare themselves emotionally and spiritually for grief. However, there are exceptions to this rule. Some stories tell of soldiers hearing the Banshee's wail before a battle, warning them of their impending death. Those who heard it and had the courage to flee might survive, though they would be branded as cowards. More often, hearing the wail sealed their fate. They would die in the coming battle, cut down by enemy swords, their names added to the long list of those mourned by the Banshee. The emotional impact of hearing the Banshee's wail is consistently described as profound and terrifying. Even those who did not believe in the Banshee, or who prided themselves on their rationality and skepticism, found themselves affected when they heard that unearthly cry. There is something in the sound, these accounts suggest, that speaks directly to a primal part of the human psyche, that bypasses conscious thought and strikes straight at our deepest fears and sorrows. Yet there is also something strangely beautiful in many descriptions of the wail. Even as it inspires dread, it also moves people to tears, evokes compassion, creates a sense of connection to something larger than themselves. This duality, terror and beauty, fear and sadness intermingled, reflects the complex emotions surrounding death itself. Death is frightening, yes, but it is also part of the natural order, part of the cycle that gives meaning to life. The Banshee's wail captures this complexity. The wail also serves a social function. In a time before instant communication, before phones and internet, the Banshee's cry could serve as a supernatural telegraph, announcing a death that had occurred far away before news could travel by ordinary means. A family might hear the Banshee and know that their son, fighting in a war across the sea, had fallen. Their daughter, who had emigrated to America, had died. Their relative, traveling on business in a distant city, would not return. The Banshee's wail carried information across distance, connecting families to their far-flung members through the medium of supernatural sound. This aspect of the legend speaks to the pain of emigration, a constant feature of Irish history. So many Irish people left their homeland, forced out by famine, poverty, or lack of opportunity, seeking new lives in America, Australia, Britain, or elsewhere. Families were separated by oceans and continents, and the death of a loved one in a foreign land was a particular agony. You might not learn of it for weeks or months. You would not be present for the funeral. You could not properly mourn. The Banshee's wail, in these stories, serves to maintain the connection between the living and the dead even across vast distances, ensuring that the family still knows, still mourns, still honors their lost member. The quality of the wail might also indicate the nature of the death. A sudden, violent death might produce a shriek. A gentle passing might produce a softer keening. Multiple banshees appearing together, all wailing in chorus, indicated the death of someone particularly important, a great chief, a king, a saint. This ability to interpret meaning from the quality of the wail gave the Banshee's cry a language all its own, a supernatural communication that conveyed not just someone will die, but something about who and how. Understanding the Banshee's wail helps us understand why this figure has persisted in Irish folklore and consciousness. The wail is not just a frightening sound. It is an acknowledgement, a witnessing, a refusal to let death pass unnoticed. In its way, the Banshee's cry is an act of love, for it ensures that no one dies alone and unmourned, that every death, no matter how distant or how obscure, is marked by a voice crying out in sorrow. The Banshee, in her wailing, bears witness to the suffering of mortality, and in that witnessing, she honors both the dead and the living who mourn them. One of the most intriguing aspects of Banshee lore is the concept of family banshees, supernatural beings attached to specific family lines, who appear generation after generation to herald the death of family members. While Banshee stories exist throughout Ireland, the tradition held that certain ancient families were particularly blessed, or cursed, with their own dedicated Banshee. The lore names 5 great families as having their own Banshees: the O'Neills, the O'Briens, the O'Gradys, the O'Connors, and the Kavanaghs. These families were among the oldest and most powerful in Ireland, with lineages stretching back to the ancient Celtic tribes, to the time before surnames even existed. They were families of kings and chieftains, of warriors and landholders, of those who shaped Irish history through centuries of triumph and tragedy. Let us examine each of these families and their associated banshees, for in these specific stories, we can see how the general Banshee legend became deeply personal, how a figure of folklore became an intimate part of family identity and memory. The O'Neill family traces its lineage back to Niall of the Nine Hostages, a legendary High King of Ireland who lived in the 4th or 5th century. The O'Neills were kings of Ulster, ruling from their base in what is now County Tyrone, and they maintained their power for centuries. The O'Neill Banshee is named Maven, also spelled Maeve or Maving, and she is known as the White Lady of Sorrow. Maven was said to reside at Shane's Castle, the O'Neill stronghold near Lough Neagh, the the largest lake in Ireland. The castle had a room specifically designated as hers, a space that family members and guests would avoid. Those who did enter sometimes reported seeing an impression in the bed, as if someone had been lying there, though no living person had entered. Maevin's wails would echo through the castle before the death of an O'Neill, and family members came to recognize her voice, to understand its meaning. A particularly notable incident occurred in 1816, when a fire broke out in Shane's castle during a gathering. The fire destroyed part of the castle, and local legend attributed this to Maevin's anger at having uninvited guests disturb her space. Whether one believes this supernatural explanation or not, the story illustrates how deeply embedded the Banshee was in the family's sense of identity. She was not just a legend to them, she was a presence, a family member of sorts, albeit one to be treated with respect and caution. The O'Brien family descends from Brian Boru, perhaps the most famous High King in Irish history. Brian Boru united much of Ireland under his rule, and led the Irish forces to victory against the Vikings at the Battle of Clontarf in 1014, though he died in the battle's aftermath. The O'Briens were kings of Munster, ruling from their seat at Kincora, near Killaloe in what is now County Clare. The O'Brien Banshee is named Abel or Eobheil, and she is often described as the Queen of the Banshees, the most powerful of these spirits. Abel dwelt on the rock of Craglia overlooking Killaloe, and she had her own court of 25 lesser banshees who attended her. Before the Battle of Clontarf in 1014, Abel is said to have appeared to Brian Boru, telling him that he would die but that his cause would triumph. Brian accepted this prophecy with courage, went into battle knowing it would be his last, and indeed fell in the battle even as his forces won victory. This story of Abel and Brian Boru shows the Banshee's role as prophet as well as mourner. She doesn't just announce death after it happens. She sometimes appears before, giving warning, allowing preparation. The fact that Brian Boru met his fate with courage and acceptance, knowing what was coming, speaks to the Irish understanding of honor and destiny. The Banshee's warning was not something to run from but to acknowledge and face with dignity. Abel's role as Queen of the Banshees also appears in other stories. She is described as beautiful and terrible, possessed of great power. Her 25 attendant banshees might accompany her when announcing the death of someone particularly important, creating a chorus of otherworldly wails. The O'Briens maintained their power for centuries after Brian Boru's death, and Abel continued to watch over them, her cry echoing from Craglia whenever death approached. The O'Grady family, also of Munster, had their own banshee traditions. The O'Gradys were nobles of North Munster, with lands in what is now County Limerick. Their banshee was said to appear as a washerwoman at times, scrubbing clothes at a ford in the river, a clear connection to the Bean Nye tradition. The sight of this ghostly washerwoman meant that death would soon visit the O'Grady household. The O'Connor family was the royal family of Connaught, the western province of Ireland, ruling from their seat at Cruachan in what is now County Roscommon. Several members of the O'Connor family held the title of High King of Ireland during the medieval period. Their banshee was particularly associated with protecting the family's sovereignty, appearing not just at deaths but sometimes at moments of political crisis, warning of threats to the family's power and position. The Kavanagh family descends from Donal Kavanagh, son of Dermot MacMurrough, King of Leinster. The MacMurrough Kavanaghs were powerful nobles in the province of Leinster, particularly in what is now County Carlow and surrounding areas. Their banshee traditions are less well documented than those of the O'Neills and O'Briens, but stories of wailing spirits heralding Kavanagh deaths persisted in the region for centuries. These 5 families represent the pure Milesian stock of Ireland, families of Gaelic origin who could trace their lineage back to the ancient Celtic inhabitants of the island. According to strict tradition, only families of this pure Gaelic heritage could have a banshee. Families of Norman, Saxon, or other non-Gaelic origin would not be visited by a banshee, no matter how long they had lived in Ireland or how powerful they became. However, folklore being what it is, exceptions to this rule emerged. The Geraldine family, descendants of Norman invaders who arrived in the 12th century, were said to have a banshee, with the explanation being that they had become more Irish than the Irish themselves. They had adopted Irish language, customs, and culture so thoroughly that they were effectively absorbed into Irish identity. Similarly, the Bunworth family of County Cork, of Anglo-Saxon origin, had a banshee associated with their line, explained by the fact that a Bunworth had been a great patron of Irish musicians and thus earned the loyalty of a musical banshee. These exceptions show how the banshee's attachment could be understood as a matter of cultural identity and spiritual connection rather than purely blood descent. A family that truly embraced Irish culture, that honored Irish traditions, that maintained the bonds of community and custom, might earn a banshee's guardianship even without ancient Gaelic ancestry. As Irish families intermarried over the centuries, the tradition held that banshees were passed down through the female line, or that a family might acquire multiple banshees through different ancestral connections. This meant that by the modern era, virtually every old Irish family could claim some connection to a banshee, even if they couldn't name a specific spirit attached to their line. The concept of family banshees speaks to several important aspects of Irish culture. First, it emphasizes the importance of lineage and family identity. In a society organized around kinship groups and clans, knowing your family history, understanding your place in a long lineage, was crucial. The banshee reinforced this by being a permanent fixture across generations, a constant presence that connected the current generation to all those who had come before. Second, it provides a sense of being watched over, protected, even in death. The banshee, particularly when understood as a protective spirit rather than a malevolent one, serves as a guardian ensuring that family members are properly mourned, that their deaths don't go unnoticed, that the family continues to honor its obligations to the dead. Third, it creates a narrative of specialness, of being chosen. To have a banshee was, in a sense, a mark of distinction, proof of your family's ancient heritage and significance. This could be a source of pride, even if the banshee herself was feared. The persistence of these family banshee traditions, even after Irish families emigrated to other countries, is particularly noteworthy. There are accounts from America, Australia, and elsewhere of Irish immigrants or their descendants hearing the banshee's wail before learning of a death back in Ireland, or even hearing it before the death of a family member in the new land. This suggests that the banshee's attachment transcended geography, that she followed her family wherever they went, maintaining the connection to Irish heritage even across oceans and continents. In modern Ireland, most people don't claim to have personal experience with a family banshee, but the concept remains part of cultural consciousness. It's not uncommon to hear people, half joking but half serious, talk about their family's banshee, or to reference the idea when discussing family history and traditions. The banshee has become a symbol of Irish family identity, a supernatural embodiment of the ties that bind generations together across time. While the banshee is often dismissed as mere superstition or folklore, there exists a surprising number of historical accounts from people who claim to have encountered her. These accounts, documented in memoirs, letters, newspapers, and oral histories, provide a fascinating glimpse into how the banshee legend was experienced as a living reality by many Irish people across the centuries. Perhaps the most famous banshee encounter comes from the memoirs of Lady Fanshawe. Lady was married to Sir Richard Fanshawe, who served as Secretary of War to King Charles I during the English Civil War. During the tumultuous period around 1649, the Fanshawes found themselves in Ireland, moving from place to place as they sought passage to Spain where Sir Richard had been ordered by the king. During their travels, they stayed for 3 days at the castle of Lady Honora O'Brien, somewhere in County Clare, possibly near Bunratty Castle or Castle Lake. The castle stood surrounded by a moat, and the room where the Fanshawe slept was high off the ground, its window overlooking the water. Around 1 o'clock in the morning of their first night there, Lady Anne was awakened by a terrible scream. She arose and drew back the curtain of the window, and there, outside, she saw a young woman leaning into the casement from outside, despite the fact that the window was dozens of feet above the moat and there was no ledge or foothold that could support a physical person. Lady Anne described the figure as having pale skin, a ghastly complexion, and reddish hair that hung loose and dishevelled over her shoulders. The figure was dressed in white, in a style that seemed to be that of ancient Ireland. The woman continued to appear at the window for some time, and Lady Anne heard her cry ahone. 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 A phonetic rendering of the Irish word ochan, meaning alas or woe, a traditional expression of grief. Finally, the figure vanished with another ghastly shriek. Lady Anne was terrified and had great difficulty waking her husband, who was sleeping soundly. When she finally roused him and told him what she had seen, he was troubled. He had heard tales of such apparitions during his time in Ireland, and he knew what they signified. The next morning, Lady Anne learned that a cousin of Lady Honora O'Brien had died during the night, around 2 o'clock in the morning, in another part of the castle. The death had been expected, as the person had been ill, but this information had been kept from the Fanshawe so as not to disturb them as guests. Lady Honora then admitted to Lady Anne that the guest room they had been sleeping in had a dark history. It had once been the bedroom of a woman who had become pregnant by a previous owner of the castle. When he discovered her pregnancy, he murdered her and her unborn child, drowning her in the moat. Ever since, whenever someone in the O'Brien family was about to die, the spirit of this murdered woman would appear at that window, warning of the approaching death. This account from Lady Fanshawe's memoirs is remarkable for several reasons. First, it comes from a reliable source. Lady Anne was an educated noblewoman whose memoirs are generally considered trustworthy on other matters. Second, though the memoirs were not published until the 19th century, they describe events from the 17th century and appear to have been based on her own written records from that time. Third, it includes specific, verifiable details. The Fanshawe did stay in that area at that time. There was indeed an O'Brien family with castles in County Clare, and the description matches other Banshee accounts from the period. Notably, neither Lady Fanshawe nor Lady O'Brien used the term Banshee in describing the apparition. Yet the description matches Banshee lore perfectly. The female figure, the wailing, the announcement of death, the connection to a specific family. This suggests that the Banshee legend was already well established by this time, even if the exact English word Banshee wasn't yet in common use. Another famous historical account involves King James I of Scotland. In 1437, James was warned by a woman in white of an assassination plot against him. The woman appeared to him and told him that the Earl of Athol would lead an attempt on his life. James told his personal advisor about this warning, but before he could take action to protect himself, the assassination occurred. James was killed by the Earl of Athol and other Scottish nobles in exactly the manner the mysterious woman had foretold. While this account is less detailed than Lady Fanshawe's and comes to us through historical chronicles rather than personal memoirs, it follows the pattern of Banshee appearances, a female spirit warning of impending death, specifically of violent death. The fact that James was able to tell someone about the warning before he died suggests he took it seriously, that he recognized the figure as supernatural and prophetic. In 1801, another well-documented incident occurred at the home of the Commander-in-Chief of British forces in Ireland. Multiple witnesses reported hearing an otherworldly wailing that cried out the name Rossmore. This wailing was heard through the night, and in the morning, news came that Baron Rossmore had died during those same hours. The witnesses, all of them educated members of the military and social elite, had no explanation for how they had heard this wail announcing a death they had no way of knowing about through ordinary means. The Irish Times, one of Ireland's major newspapers, published accounts of Banshee sightings throughout the 19th century. In an 1893 article, the paper detailed various local assertions and disputes about the Banshee legend, including recent reports from families who claimed to have heard her wail. The fact that a respectable newspaper gave space to such stories indicates how seriously the Banshee phenomenon was taken, at least in some quarters of Irish society. Lady Augusta Gregory, a prominent collector of Irish folklore in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, claimed to have heard the Banshee on multiple occasions near her home at Cool Park in County Galway. Lady Gregory was a woman of education and culture, a playwright and patron of the arts, not given to superstition. Yet she maintained that she had heard that distinctive wail and that it had been followed, each time, by news of a death in one of the old families of the area. The Cathraim Thud Hialphe, or Triumphs of Torlo, a historical chronicle from the 14th century, contains one of the earliest written references to banshee-like figures. The text describes women of supernatural origin appearing on battlefields, wailing and washing blood-stained garments. While the word banshee isn't used in these medieval texts, the descriptions match the banshee lore, particularly the washerwoman aspect, suggesting that the belief extends back at least to the 14th century and probably much earlier. Castle-specific banshee stories abound in Ireland. At Bunratty Castle in County Clare, a guest of the O'Brien family awoke one night to see a pale, red-haired girl floating outside her window, wailing mournfully. The next day, a member of the O'Brien family was found dead in another part of the castle. At Duckett's Grove in County Carlow, built in 1830 by William Duckett, paranormal activity has been reported for generations, with the ruins now considered one of Ireland's most haunted sites, with the Banshee's cry allegedly heard in the surrounding areas. Dunluce Castle near the northern coast, perched dramatically on cliffs above the sea, was home to the O'Donnell family, who had their own Banshee tradition. The O'Donnell Banshee was said to haunt the cliffs near the Mermaid's Cave, her wails echoing across the waves, foretelling tragedies for the family. A particularly chilling account describes a ghostly woman in white seen weeping near the cliffs before a great storm destroyed part of the castle. What makes these historical accounts particularly interesting is their consistency despite coming from diverse sources across different time periods and regions. The core elements remain stable: a female figure, often in white, with wild or disheveled hair, whose wailing announces death. The witnesses often include educated, reliable people who had nothing to gain by inventing such stories. Many of the witnesses were not even Irish and had little prior knowledge of Banshee folklore, yet their descriptions match the traditional accounts. The question of how to interpret these historical accounts remains open. Skeptics might attribute them to misidentification of natural phenomena, owls or other night birds whose cries were heard in conditions of stress or expectation and interpreted through the lens of cultural belief. The power of suggestion and expectation could play a role, particularly in cases where someone was already ill and death was anticipated. Grief and trauma can also create powerful sensory experiences. Yet the sheer number and consistency of these accounts, the reliability of many of the witnesses, and the specific details that match traditional folklore suggest that something significant was being experienced, even if the interpretation varies. Whether one views these accounts as genuine encounters with supernatural beings, as psychological phenomena rooted in grief and cultural expectation, or as some combination of both, they demonstrate the powerful role the Banshee played in how Irish people understood and coped with death. These historical accounts also show how the Banshee was not merely an abstract folkloric concept, but a lived reality for many Irish people. The Banshee was not just something from old stories. She was something that might appear to you, that might announce a death in your own family, that connected you personally to the mysteries of mortality and the unseen world. This personal connection kept the belief alive even as Ireland modernized, even as scientific thinking became more prevalent, even as the Catholic Church continued to discourage belief in the old fairies and spirits. Ireland's 4 provinces, Ulster, Munster, Connaught, and Leinster, each developed their own particular traditions around the Banshee, reflecting the diversity of Irish culture and the way folklore adapts to local landscapes, histories, and communities. While the core concept of the Banshee remained consistent, the details of her appearance, behavior, and meaning shifted as you moved from one part of Ireland to another. In Ulster, the northern province, Banshee traditions were closely tied to specific noble families, particularly the O'Neills who ruled much of Ulster for centuries. The Ulster Banshee was often described as more aristocratic, more refined in her appearance and behavior. This might reflect Ulster's history as a region of powerful dynasties with strong connections to ancient Celtic nobility. The washerwoman aspect of the Banshee appears more frequently in Ulster traditions as well, with stories of the Bean Nigh seen at fords and streams, scrubbing blood-stained clothes or armor. The Ulster landscape, with its many rivers and streams, its wild coastline, and its mountainous terrain, provided natural settings for these supernatural encounters. Lonely fords where rivers could be crossed were liminal spaces, boundaries between one territory and another, and thus appropriate locations for beings who existed at the boundary between life and death. The image of a supernatural woman washing clothes at such a ford, preparing garments for a death that had not yet occurred, carried powerful symbolic weight. In Munster, the southern province, Banshee lore was rich and varied. This was a Brian territory, home to Abel, the queen of the Banshees. Munster Banshees were often described as stately and dignified, befitting their connection to such a powerful family. The Munster Banshee's cry was frequently described as more melodious, less harsh than in other regions, a low, mournful keening that was beautiful even as it was heartbreaking. Munster's landscape of rolling green hills, ancient castles, and dramatic coastal cliffs provided an atmospheric backdrop for Banshee stories. The region's strong connection to ancient Irish kingship and its long history of resistance to outside invasion gave its folklore a particular depth. The Banshees of Munster were often portrayed as protectors of the land itself, not just of individual families, warning of threats both personal and political. Connaught, the western province, faces the wild Atlantic Ocean, and its Banshee traditions reflect the dramatic nature of its landscape. Connaught Banshees were often described as more frightening in appearance, with blood-red eyes, wild hair like storm clouds, and an intensity of grief that bordered on fury. The western coast's exposure to Atlantic storms, its bogs and wetlands, its sense of being at the edge of the known world, all contributed to a folklore that emphasized the raw, untamed aspects of supernatural beings. The Connaught Banshee's cry was said to be particularly piercing, capable of being heard above the howl of wind and the crash of waves. In a region where the elements themselves could be deadly, where storms could destroy homes and livelihoods, where the sea claimed many lives, the Banshee fit naturally into a worldview that acknowledged the constant presence of death and danger. Leinster, the eastern province, was more settled, more urbanized, closer to centers of English power during centuries of occupation. Leinster Banshee traditions often emphasized the connection to noble families and their ancestral homes. The Banshee here was sometimes portrayed as more refined, her appearances more formal, her role more clearly defined as guardian of family lineage and status. Yet Leinster also preserved ancient traditions, particularly in more rural areas away from Dublin and other towns. The Kavanagh family, one of the 5 great families with their own Banshee, were based primarily in Leinster, and their Banshee traditions remained strong in County Carlow and surrounding areas. The Fanshawe, the keening woman, was particularly associated with Leinster, and the connection between human keening traditions and Banshee lore was especially clear in this province. These regional variations within Ireland demonstrate how folklore is shaped by landscape, history, and local culture. The Banshee was not a monolithic figure imposed uniformly across Ireland, but rather a concept that each region, each community, adapted to its own needs and understanding. The Scottish variation deserves special mention, as it shows how the Banshee legend crossed the narrow waters between Ireland and Scotland, carried by shared Gaelic culture. In Scotland, particularly in the Highlands and Islands, the Banshee or Bean was closely connected to washing in water. The Scottish washerwoman was even more specifically defined than in Irish tradition, almost always seen at fords or streams, washing the grave clothes or shrouds of those about to die. The Bean was described as having distinctive physical features, red-webbed feet like those of a water bird, one nostril, one tooth, and long breasts that hung down and could be thrown over her shoulders. This vivid, specific description suggests a particularly strong tradition, one that had been refined through many retellings into a very clear image. There was even a belief that if someone could sneak up behind the Bean and suckle from one of her breasts, she would grant them a wish, though this was obviously dangerous given her supernatural nature. The Welsh had their own version called the Grach y Ribyn, though this figure was often described more as a witch than as the mournful fairy woman of Irish and Scottish tradition. The Welsh figure was said to visit families of Old Welsh stock, maintaining the connection to ancient lineage that characterized the Irish Banshee as well. What all these regional variations demonstrate is the Banshee's adaptability, her ability to fit into different cultural contexts while maintaining core elements of her identity. Whether she appeared as an aristocratic guardian in Ulster, a stately protector in Munster, a fierce spirit in Connaught, a family guardian in Leinster, or a washerwoman in Scotland, she remained fundamentally the same being. A female spirit connected to death, mourning, and the bonds between the living and the dead. These variations also reveal something important about how folklore functions. It is not fixed or static but living and dynamic, shaped by the people who tell the stories and the places where those stories are told. The Banshee legend survived and thrived precisely because it could adapt to different circumstances while maintaining its essential meaning. Each community could claim the Banshee as their own, could shape her story to reflect their particular history and concerns, while still participating in a broader Irish cultural tradition. While popular culture often portrays the Banshee as a terrifying, malevolent entity, a deeper examination of Irish folklore reveals a much more nuanced understanding. For many Irish people, particularly in earlier centuries, the Banshee was understood not primarily as a bringer of fear, but as a protector, a guardian, and a guide for souls passing from this world to the next. This more benevolent view of the Banshee centers on the concept of the family guardian. Each family's Banshee was seen as eternally bound to that family line, watching over generations, present at the births and deaths that marked the passage of time. In this interpretation, she functions as the oldest member of the family, the eternal matriarch who remains even when all others have passed on. When understood as a guardian, the Banshee's warning cry takes on a different meaning. She is not announcing death with cruel glee or indifference, but with profound sorrow. Her weeping is genuine mourning, anticipatory grief for a loss that she knows is coming. She cries because she loves the family she guards, because each death wounds her as it would wound any family member who deeply cares. This interpretation explains why some Banshees appear as beautiful young women or maternal figures rather than frightening crones. A guardian spirit need not be terrifying. Indeed, her beauty might be meant to comfort, to remind the living that death, though sad, is natural, that those who die are being taken into care by someone who loves them. The Banshee's role as guide is particularly important in understanding her function. In Irish tradition, death was seen not as an ending but as a transition, a journey from one world to another. The soul of the deceased had to cross from the realm of the living to the realm of the ancestors, had to navigate a path through the otherworld to reach its final destination. This journey was dangerous, and the soul needed help, needed someone who knew the way. The Banshee, as a being who existed at the boundary between worlds, who had one foot in each realm, could serve as a guide for these traveling souls. Her appearance before death was not just a warning but a preparation, a way of readying both the dying person and their family for the transition to come. Her wail announced that she was present and ready to help, that the soul would not have to make this journey alone. In this context, hearing the Banshee was actually a blessing, an assurance that the family was being watched over, that supernatural help was at hand during the difficult time of death and mourning. Families that had their own Banshee could take pride in this connection, seeing it as proof of their ancient heritage and their special relationship with the other world. This protective aspect of the Banshee is emphasized in stories where she appears as a beautiful woman singing a sorrowful but melodious song. In these accounts, her song is filled with love and concern, with a desire to ease the pain of loss. She might be the spirit of a young woman who died before her time, but whose love for her family was so strong that she remained as their guardian, unable or unwilling to fully pass into the next world while her family still needed her. The distinction between benevolent and malevolent banshees often came down to the relationship between the spirit and the family. A banshee who had been wronged in life, murdered, betrayed, driven to death by cruel treatment, might become an angry, vengeful spirit, celebrating rather than mourning the deaths of those who had harmed her or their descendants. But a banshee who had loved her family in life would continue that love in death, serving as an eternal guardian. This brings us to an important point. The banshee does not cause death. This cannot be emphasized enough, as it is a common misconception. The banshee predicts death, warns of death, mourns death, but she does not bring it about. Death comes from natural causes, from illness, from old age, from accidents, from violence inflicted by human hands. The banshee simply knows when it is approaching, perhaps through supernatural perception, perhaps through some deep connection to fate itself. Understanding this removes much of the fear surrounding the banshee. If she does not cause death, then there is no reason to fear her or to try to avoid her. Indeed, trying to silence her or drive her away would be counterproductive, as it would rob the family of her warning and her protection. Better to acknowledge her, to accept her presence, to understand that she is part of the family in a way that transcends normal human bonds. The banshee's role in ensuring proper mourning is another crucial aspect of her guardianship. In Irish culture, proper mourning was essential. The dead needed to be waked, to be keened over, to be honored through ritual and remembrance. A death that went unmourned was a tragedy, leaving the soul unmoored, the family dishonored, the community diminished. The banshee ensured that no death went unmourned. If a person died far from home, if news of their death had not yet reached the family, the banshee's cry would announce it, allowing the family to begin their mourning even before official word arrived. If a person was dying alone, away from loved ones, the banshee's presence meant they were not truly alone. A supernatural family member was there, bearing witness, ready to guide them onward. This aspect of the banshee connects deeply to Irish values around death and family. The Irish have long maintained elaborate funeral traditions, treating death not as something to be hidden away, but as a communal event requiring significant time and attention. Wakes could last for days. The entire community would gather. Stories would be told, prayers said, rituals observed. The banshee, in her own way, was part of this tradition, a supernatural participant in the communal acknowledgement of death. The banshee as protector also serves a psychological function. Knowing that your family has a supernatural guardian watching over you can provide comfort during difficult times. When death approaches, when a loved one is dying, the idea that a benevolent spirit is present, helping to guide the soul, providing supernatural comfort, can ease some of the terror and helplessness that surrounds mortality. This is not to say that the Banshee was never feared. Her appearance and her cry were genuinely frightening to many people, and hearing her wail inevitably meant that grief was coming, that someone beloved would soon be lost. But this fear existed alongside recognition of her protective role, creating a complex emotional relationship with the figure. In modern Irish culture, when people speak of their family's Banshee, it is often with a mixture of pride, affection, and residual fear. The Banshee becomes a story to tell, a piece of family heritage, a connection to Irish tradition. "We have a family Banshee" is not usually said with pure terror but with a kind of rueful acknowledgement. Yes, death is frightening, but our family has this ancient protector, this link to the past, this assurance that we are not alone in the universe. The benevolent interpretation of the Banshee also fits with broader Irish attitudes toward the supernatural. Irish folklore is full of fairy beings who are morally complex, neither purely good nor purely evil but possessed of their own motivations and feelings. The fairy folk could be helpful or harmful depending on how they were treated, on circumstances, on their own inscrutable reasons. The Banshee fits into this tradition, a powerful supernatural being with her own nature and purposes, who generally acts to protect her family, but who exists according to her own rules. Understanding the Banshee as protector and guide rather than as a mere harbinger of doom enriches our appreciation of Irish folklore and culture. It reveals a worldview in which death, though sad, is a natural part of the cycle of existence, in which the living and the dead maintain connections across the boundary of mortality, in which supernatural help is available to those who know how to recognize and honor it. The Banshee, in this light, is not a creature of horror stories but a profound expression of Irish spiritual life, a being who embodies the continuity of family, the reality of death, and the enduring presence of love that survives even the grave. As Ireland modernized through the 20th and into the 21st century, belief in the Banshee declined, yet it never entirely disappeared. The experiences and testimonies of those who claim to encounter the Banshee in recent times provide fascinating insights into how ancient folklore persists and adapts in the modern world. The decline of Banshee belief corresponds with several historical factors. Urbanization pulled people away from rural areas where old beliefs remained strongest. Education and scientific thinking encouraged skepticism towards supernatural explanations. The Catholic Church's continued opposition to pre-Christian beliefs discouraged open discussion of such matters. Mass emigration scattered Irish families across the globe, weakening the connection to specific places and family histories that had sustained Banshee traditions. Yet despite all this, reports of Banshee encounters continued through the 20th century and even into our current era, though with less frequency than in earlier times. Lady Gregory, writing in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, claimed to have heard the Banshee on several occasions near her home at Coole Park. This was significant because Lady Gregory was a prominent cultural figure, educated and sophisticated, not someone given to superstition or flights of fancy. Her testimony suggested that Banshee belief persisted even among Ireland's educated classes. In the 1950s, folklore collectors recording traditional singers in remote areas of Ireland occasionally captured references to the Banshee from people who spoke of her as a living reality rather than a quaint legend. These recordings preserve voices from a time when the transition from belief to skepticism was still in progress, when some people, particularly in rural areas, maintained the old understanding of the world. A story recorded from a session at the George Bernard Shaw Theatre in Carlow in 2009 tells of a more recent encounter. According to this account, a motorbike accident brought two young men to a Dublin hospital. An elderly nurse came in and asked if there was an O or MC among them. One of the men had such a surname but seemed fine, walking around with just a broken leg, while his friend was badly injured. The nurse left, and shortly afterward, the man with the surname collapsed from a ruptured liver and died. The nurse's question suggested foreknowledge, as if she had somehow known that death was approaching someone of ancient Irish lineage, exactly the pattern of Banshee lore. This story illustrates how Banshee belief adapts to modern settings. The nurse, whether she was herself a supernatural being or simply acting on some intuition or traditional knowledge, fulfilled the Banshee's function in a contemporary hospital setting. The ancient pattern, a female figure warning of death for someone of Irish heritage, persisted even in a modern urban medical context. Reports from Irish communities abroad also continued through the 20th century. Irish immigrants and their descendants in America, Australia, and other countries sometimes claimed to hear the Banshee's wail before learning of a death in the family back in Ireland, or even before a death in their own community in the new land. These accounts suggest that for some Irish people, the Banshee was understood to follow the family wherever they went, maintaining the connection to Irish heritage across vast distances. The decline in reported sightings and encounters can be attributed to several factors. Modern life offers fewer opportunities for the kind of quiet, solitary nighttime experiences that might lead to supernatural encounters. Electric lights push back the darkness. Constant noise from traffic, electronics, and other modern sources masks natural sounds. People spend less time outdoors at night in rural settings. All of this reduces the likelihood of the kind of ambiguous sensory experiences that might be interpreted as supernatural. Additionally, even if someone does have such an experience, they may be reluctant to speak about it publicly for fear of ridicule. In earlier centuries, talking about seeing or hearing the Banshee was acceptable, even expected. In our scientific age, admitting to believing in such things can invite mockery. This creates a silencing effect. Even if encounters continue, we are less likely to hear about them. Yet Banshee belief persists in more subtle ways. Many Irish people, even those who would describe themselves as skeptical or non-superstitious, retain some cultural memory of the Banshee. They might not believe they will actually encounter her, but they know the stories, they understand the tradition, and they might admit, if pressed, to feeling some residual unease about the idea. This cultural knowledge keeps the Banshee alive in Irish consciousness even when active belief has faded. The Banshee has also found new life in popular culture, though often in distorted form. Books, movies, television shows, and video games featuring Banshees have introduced the figure to global audiences, though these portrayals often emphasize horror and violence over the more nuanced traditional understanding. Shows like Teen Wolf featured a Banshee character, though the writers made up new mythology rather than adhering to Irish tradition. Horror movies use the Banshee as a frightening antagonist, usually portrayed as malevolent rather than as a mourning guardian. These modern portrayals, while often inaccurate, do serve to keep the Banshee in public awareness. Young people who encounter a Banshee in a video game or television show might become curious about the real folklore, might seek out the authentic Irish traditions, might develop an appreciation for their cultural heritage through this contemporary gateway. Tourism in Ireland has also created a new context for Banshee stories. Castle tours, ghost tours, and folklore experiences often include Banshee tales, presenting them to visitors as part of Ireland's cultural heritage. While these commercial presentations sometimes sensationalize or oversimplify the tradition, they do preserve and transmit the stories to new generations and to people who might never otherwise encounter Irish folklore. Contemporary Irish culture maintains a complex relationship with the Banshee. She appears in Irish art, poetry, and literature, often as a symbol of Irish identity or of the connection between past and present. She might be referenced in songs, invoked in political rhetoric about Irish nationalism, or used as a metaphor for grief and loss. These symbolic uses keep the Banshee culturally relevant even for those who don't believe in her literal existence. Academic study of folklore has also preserved Banshee traditions. Scholars like Patricia Lysate and others have conducted detailed research into Banshee lore, interviewing older Irish people about their family traditions, analyzing historical texts, and documenting regional variations. This scholarly work ensures that even if belief fades entirely, the knowledge of these traditions will not be lost. Among Irish diaspora communities, particularly in America, the Banshee remains a symbol of Irish heritage. Irish Americans might display Banshee images, tell Banshee stories at cultural events, or reference the Banshee as part of their ethnic identity. For people separated from Ireland by generations, the Banshee serves as a connection to ancestral homeland, a piece of culture that can be maintained even when other connections have weakened. Some modern Irish people, particularly those interested in Celtic spirituality, Irish paganism, or folk traditions, have actively worked to preserve and revive Banshee belief. These practitioners might make offerings to the Banshee, honor her at Samhain or other significant times, or incorporate her into their spiritual practice. This represents not a survival of unbroken belief, but a conscious choice to reclaim and revitalize traditional Irish spirituality. The question of whether anyone still genuinely encounters the Banshee in the 21st century remains unanswered and perhaps unanswerable. There are occasional accounts, often shared quietly or anonymously, of strange wails heard in the night, of unsettling experiences that seem to defy ordinary explanation, of deaths that were preceded by something unexplainable. Whether these represent genuine supernatural encounters, misinterpretation of natural phenomena, psychological experiences shaped by cultural knowledge, or something else entirely remains a matter of personal interpretation and belief. What is clear is that the Banshee, even in our modern era, retains cultural power. She remains one of the most recognizable figures in Irish folklore, her name known far beyond Ireland's shores. She symbolizes the Irish relationship with death, the importance of family and lineage, the persistence of ancient beliefs in a modern world. Even for those who do not believe in her literal existence, the Banshee represents something profound about Irish culture and identity, a refusal to forget the past, a willingness to acknowledge the mysteries that remain despite our scientific knowledge, a recognition that some truths about death, grief, and family transcend rational explanation. As we draw toward the end of our journey through the mists of Banshee lore, it is worth reflecting on what this figure means, not just to Irish history, but to Irish identity today, and to our universal human understanding of death, mourning, and the connections that bind us across generations. The Banshee is, at her core, about memory. She ensures that no death goes unnoticed, that every person who passes from this world is mourned, that the connections between the living and the dead are maintained. In a world where individual lives can seem insignificant, where people might die alone and unmourned, where distance and time can break family bonds, the Banshee stands as a promise. You will not be forgotten. Someone will cry for you. Someone will mark your passing. Your death will matter. This promise carries profound meaning in Irish history, a history marked by so much loss. The Great Famine of the 1840s killed 1 million people and forced another million to emigrate. Generations of Irish people left their homeland, forced out by poverty and lack of opportunity, often never to return. Wars, rebellions, and political oppression claimed countless lives. The Banshee's wail becomes, in this context, a cry not just for individual deaths but for collective grief, for a nation that has known too much loss, that has watched too many of its children die or disappear into far lands. Yet the Banshee also represents resilience. She endures. She continues to watch over her families despite everything, despite the passage of centuries, despite emigration and modernization and all the forces that might have been expected to erase the old beliefs. In her endurance, she symbolizes Irish culture itself, battered but not broken, changed but not destroyed, adapting but still recognizably itself. The Banshee connects modern Irish people to their pre-Christian past, to a time when gods walked the earth and the boundary between natural and supernatural was thin and permeable. She is a living link to the Tuatha Dé Danann, to the Morrigan, to the ancient understanding of death as a transition rather than an ending. In a world increasingly dominated by global culture, where local traditions are under threat, the Banshee represents Irish distinctiveness, Irish uniqueness, Irish refusal to be completely absorbed into a homogeneous modernity. The Banshee also offers a different way of thinking about death than what modern Western culture typically provides. In our contemporary world, death is often hidden away, sanitized, made invisible. We die in hospitals rather than at home. Funerals are brief and formal. Grief is expected to be private and quickly resolved. The Banshee tradition stands against all this. It says, death must be acknowledged loudly, publicly, with emotion fully expressed. Grief must be given voice. The dead must be honored not with silence but with wailing, with keening, with a sound that tears through the fabric of normal life and forces everyone to pay attention. This understanding of death as something to be confronted rather than hidden may offer psychological benefits that modern approaches sometimes lack. Research into grief and mourning has shown that suppressing emotion, attempting to quickly move on, and treating death as something shameful or embarrassing can sometimes lead to complicated grief and psychological distress. The Irish tradition of lengthy wakes, of communal mourning, of giving grief full expression, may have provided communities with healthier frameworks for processing loss. The Banshee, in her role as the eternal keener, the one who refuses to let death pass quietly, embodies this older approach to mourning. The Banshee also speaks to the power and importance of women in Irish culture. She is a female figure who holds tremendous power, who acts as guardian and prophet, whose voice must be heeded. In a historical context where women's voices were often marginalized or dismissed, the Banshee represents female power expressed through death and mourning, through the domains that women traditionally controlled. The keening women, whose voices inspired and informed the Banshee legend, were women who wielded real power through their ritual role, who commanded respect and payment for their services, who could not be silenced despite church opposition. For Irish people today, whether living in Ireland or scattered across the globe, the Banshee serves multiple functions. For some, she remains a genuine belief, a real presence that might still manifest when death approaches. For others, she is a symbol, a piece of cultural heritage to be preserved and honored even if not literally believed. For still others, she is simply a story, a piece of folklore that connects them to their ancestors and their homeland. All of these relationships with the Banshee are valid. Folklore does not require universal literal belief to have meaning and value. The Banshee can be simultaneously a supernatural being, a cultural symbol, and a story, operating on multiple levels at once. This flexibility, this ability to mean different things to different people while maintaining a core identity, is part of what has allowed the Banshee to survive and thrive across centuries of change. As we reach the end of our journey tonight, as the first light of dawn begins to touch the horizon, driving back the darkness in which the Banshee makes her home, consider what this figure might mean for you. Whether you have Irish ancestry or not, whether you believe in supernatural beings or not, the Banshee offers us wisdom about death, grief, and remembrance that transcends any particular cultural context. She reminds us that death is natural, inevitable, and worthy of acknowledgement. She teaches us that grief should not be suppressed but expressed, that mourning is not weakness but necessary work. She shows us that the dead are not truly gone as long as they are remembered, as long as someone cries for them, as long as their stories are told. In our modern world, where we are increasingly isolated from each other, where traditional communities have fractured, where death is professionalized and removed from everyday life, perhaps we need the Banshee more than ever. not as a frightening ghost story but as a reminder of older wisdom, that we are connected to each other across generations, that death deserves respect and recognition, that grief is a natural and necessary response to loss. The Banshee's wail, echoing across the centuries, carries within it the grief of countless losses, the love of countless families, the wisdom of ancient traditions that understood death not as an enemy to be denied but as a companion to be acknowledged. Her cry reminds us that life is precious precisely because it is finite, that love is meaningful precisely because we will lose those we love, that memory and story are how we transcend the boundaries of individual mortality. So tonight, as you drift towards sleep, if you hear a cry in the distance, a wail that seems to come from nowhere and everywhere at once, do not be afraid. It might be just the wind, or a night bird, or the sound of the modern world. Or it might be the Banshee, fulfilling her ancient duty, watching over her family, ensuring that death does not go unnoticed or unmourned. And if it is the Banshee, if you are blessed or cursed with her attention, remember, she is not your enemy. She is family. She is memory. She is the voice that ensures you will not be forgotten, that promises someone will cry for you when your time comes, that guarantees your death will matter in the great scheme of things. Sleep well, dear listeners. May your dreams be peaceful. And may the Banshee's cry, if it ever comes for you, carry within it not just sorrow but love, not just fear but the comfort of knowing that you belong to something larger than yourself, a family, a tradition, a story that began long before you and will continue long after you are gone. If you enjoyed this journey through Irish mythology and folklore, please consider subscribing to our channel and sharing this video with others who might appreciate these ancient stories. Ring the bell to be notified when new videos are posted. Your support helps us continue to explore the rich heritage of Irish and Celtic traditions, to preserve these stories for future generations, and to keep alive the wisdom they contain. Thank you for joining me tonight in the company of the Banshee. Until we meet again, may the road rise to meet you, may the wind be always at your back, and may you never hear the wail of the Banshee except in stories safely told by the warm light of your own hearth. Good night, dear travelers. And remember, some voices echo through eternity.